When they reached Keanu's destination, Joe silently exited the taxi and reached into his wallet, taking out a thick envelope with worn edges that appeared to have been carried around for a while. His grip on the steering wheel tightened once more, but he nodded as if Keanu's words had given him a tiny bit of comfort. Keanu glanced at Joe, who had parked the cab and was still deep in concentration, staring straight ahead. Without saying anything, Keanu just moved to the front of the car, unlocked the passenger door, and put the envelope on the seat next to Joe. It was a simple but purposeful gesture, and Keanu didn't wait for Joe to notice before walking away and vanishing into the night. Joe frowned and stared at the simple envelope, which had no markings, no return address, and no message. He wasn't sure what to make of it. Perhaps it was a tip, but why would someone leave it like this without saying anything? A part of him felt uneasy, as though this wasn't just a random act of generosity, but the fatigue in his bones made it hard for him to focus on the mystery of it all. He glanced over his shoulder to see if Keanu had left anything else behind, but the actor was already walking away, his figure blending into the bustling city. After a few moments of hesitation, Joe finally reached for the envelope. His hands were trembling more from the weight of his emotions than anything physical. He opened it slowly, his breath catching as he saw the thick stack of cash inside. His eyes widened in disbelief. It was more money than he had seen in months, possibly even years, but there was more beneath the money. Was a folded note. Joe unfolded it carefully, his hand shaking. He read the words, his breath catching in his throat. The note read, "Joe, I've been listening to your story, and I can feel the pain you're carrying. Life has thrown many challenges your way, but I want you to know something. You're not alone. I want to help. I'll cover all the costs for your daughter's wedding, no matter what it takes. You don't need to worry about that. Also, I want to help you get back on your feet. I'll make sure you and your daughter have a permanent home, a place where you don't have to fear losing everything you've done. Enough. It's time to let someone help you." As Joe read the words, he felt a lump form in his throat. His eyes burned with unshed tears. He couldn't believe it. The tears started to fall slowly, at first, then faster, as if the weight of the past few years of struggle was finally being lifted from his shoulders. Keanu had been listening when Joe came to the realization that a stranger's compassion may occasionally change his life more profoundly than he could have ever imagined. Joe remained seated for a while. You will be shocked by the concealed message that Keanu Reeves leaves after surreptitiously tipping a good taxi driver. Keanu Reeves had recently completed. He had always handled fame with grace, but after a long day of interviews and public appearances, the fatigue from standing and answering questions was beginning to get to him. Tonight, he got into the back seat of a yellow taxi because he needed to disconnect from the demands of his life and just unwind. It was easier to take a taxi and get some quiet away from the flashing lights and unending attention, and as the door clicked shut, he exhaled deeply. The driver was an elderly man with graying hair and significant facial creases. He appeared worn out, but his eyes conveyed a different message. There seemed to be something heavy in them, as if he had been carrying the weight of the world for too long. Keanu couldn't help but notice that without saying anything, he settled back into the seat and gave the man some space. The ride started, and the city's noise faded into the background, replaced by the rhythmic hum of the car's engine. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. They were just two strangers who understood that sometimes there was nothing to say, but as the car drove through the streets, Keanu sensed something unspoken between them. The driver's grip on the steering wheel was tight, his knuckles were white, making it obvious that something was bothering him. After a few moments, Keanu chose to break the silence, looked in the rearview mirror, and forced a small smile. You could say that even though you've been driving for years, there are days when it feels harder than others. The tone was flat, but there was a hint of something heavier and deeper. The sound of Joe's phone ringing interrupted the city's hum, and Keanu hesitated before answering, looking at the screen, his hand trembling slightly as he picked up the phone, his face changing from calm to tense. Keanu nodded in understanding, sensing that there was more to the story, but he didn't press him further, respecting the older man's need for silence. Instead, he sat back, closing his eyes and letting the gentle sway of the car relax his tired body for a brief moment. Keanu was unable to ignore the shift. The voice on the other end sounded icy and almost businesslike, and Joe's tone was strained, almost as if he was preparing himself for bad news. "This is Mr. Matthews, Joe. Although I've been patient with you, I've had enough of you being late with your rent once more. I've already granted you an extension, but you must pay by the end of this week. Else, I fear you'll have to vacate." Joe's face turned white. The words were like a kick to his stomach. As he attempted to reply, Keanu could hear the tension in his voice, but his words came off as a little desperate. Though Mr. Matthews was unconvinced, "I'll try to get the money together. I just need a little more time." "Time's up, Joe. Don't force me to come to the property to eject you. I've finished waiting." The line went dead. Joe put down the phone and stared straight ahead, his eyes glassy with a mix of resignation and terror. The tension in the car was now evident. Keanu waited a bit before gently asking if everything was well, since he could feel the burden of Joe's problems bearing down on him. It seemed too heavy for one man to handle alone. For a moment, Keanu thought he might stop talking, but then Joe spoke again, his words quieter, as if he was finally opening up to someone who might understand. Joe kept his eyes on the road, but he let out a deep, exhausted sigh. His voice was low, tinged with a sadness that seemed to fill the car. "I'm not sure if I should even tell you this," but his voice changed. "I've been having a lot of trouble. My son passed away a few years ago, and it's been difficult to lose him in that way. Now that I can't even support my daughter, who is getting married soon, and I don't have enough money for the wedding, it feels like I'm failing her. I can hardly pay the rent, and I'm going to lose my house." Joe's anguish was evident in his voice. Keanu's heart sank when he heard the sorrow in Joe's voice. Instead of pressing, he just nodded, letting Joe talk freely. "It's difficult to be strong when you feel so powerless." Joe's voice broke as he continued. "I'm trying, but I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. My daughter deserves so much more. I want to give her everything, but I don't even know if I'll have a roof over her head after the wedding." There was a protracted silence. Keanu was at a loss for words. Sometimes, all people needed was someone to listen to them, someone who could provide a glimmer of hope during their worst hours. Keanu said, "I'm sorry, Joe," in a gentle yet compassionate tone. "Although I can't fathom what you're going through, sometimes all we can do is try our hardest." The uncontrollably flowing tears, the anguish he had been carrying for so long, the fear, the grief, and the crushing weight of failure seemed to diminish with each word Keanu wrote. The generosity and kindness were too much for him to handle. For the first time in years, he had never expected anyone, much less a stranger, to show such compassion. Joe wiped the tears from his eyes, his heart full of gratitude, knowing that the kindness of one man had changed the course of his life forever. He felt a glimmer of hope that his daughter's wedding would go as planned and that they would have a permanent home, a place where he didn't have to worry every month about losing everything. Keanu had given him not just money but something far more valuable, the belief that good things could still happen even in the darkest of times. His kindness isn't always big gestures or obvious to the public. Sometimes it comes in quiet moments. When we least anticipated, Joe's story teaches us that no matter how broken or lost we feel, there is always hope, and sometimes the simple act of caring can help us rebuild our lives. In the end, it's the compassion we show others that leaves the longest lasting impact. Keanu's hidden gesture wasn't just about paying for Joe's wedding. It was a lifeline for him, giving him more than just financial assistance. It gave him the belief that he mattered and that he wasn't invisible in a world that frequently ignored him. Make sure to press the bell, like, and subscribe if you think compassion has the power to inspire others and want to see more tales like this one. Let's promote happiness together by exchanging personal tales of generosity in the comments section below.